I first met Richard at the Sidewalk Cafe in Venice in I think it was July 5th or 3rd or something of 1978, where I met Ron Kovic. He was with Ron having a brunch or something in the daylight, and around them, through the course of the afternoon, were a bunch of Vietnam veterans. And it was my first exposure, frankly, to that kind of protest and anger still at the war years later. Richard was out there. He gave me his book. He wrote about Cambodia. He had been prior to that, I would say a serious young journalist who was willing to take huge chances. So in the back of he draws me back to the plane, the airport, and driving away, and I just happened to look in the back seat. It was just luck, happenstance. I saw this weird-looking manuscript with oil stains on it. It was just a mess. It was just, the back of his car looked like a rummage bin, in a sale somewhere. I mean, he had everything in the back. His toaster, he lived in his car too, clothes and stuff. Weird. And there it was. So I said, what's this? He told me, he said, a bunch of stories I wrote about Salvador. I don't know, I figured I could sell them. Haven't had much luck or something like that. So I said, let me read it. And I took it down to LA and I read it. And I was just blown away.
So he went back to LA. I never thought anything about it. And he called me up a couple of weeks later. He said, Richie, this is great. This would be a great movie. I want you to fly down and let's write it together. And I said, Oliver, you're out of your mind. Hollywood's not going to make this kind of film. Yes, they will. I'll raise the money myself. I'll sell my house. I'll hawk everything I own. We'll raise $500,000. We'll shoot it like Easy Rider.
I had pretty much decided to step outside the system that I had had some success in as a screenwriter, but not as a director. And I wasn't getting anywhere. My career was fumbling sideways. And I said to myself, let me just make a small movie about something exciting and try to put all the money up myself and do it. I ended up writing the screenplay that he talked, I wrote, he talked, I wrote, I asked questions. He outlined the scenes the way he remembered them or saw them or he changed them, I don't know. But whatever, it was a good story. And I saw more and more how it could come together into a really good story.
We banged out a script in about 3 weeks. He took it around to the studios, didn't want it. So we went down to El Salvador. And the idea was we were going to con the right-wing junta, these Major Bob and the boys were running the place, into letting us shoot there, and they were going to give us their army and Air Force and tanks, so we have this big budget look, all provided by them, and we gave them the phony script in Spanish, which made them the good guys, and the communists the evil ones. And they loved it. And they loved Oliver because of Scarface, that line in Pacino, if he's a commie, I'll kill him for free.
We were looking to score the whole thing, get choppers, get planes, and do all that military stuff where they're going after the guerrillas and kicking their ass.
Speed. Okay, take 2. Action. Hi, Nancy. It's Richard. Yeah, Boyle.
If you wanted me to play myself, I did some scenes with the nanny, doing love scenes with the nanny and doing the scenes with Dr. Rock. And he even sent me to acting school. I do have now much more respect for actors than I had before, because it's hard work.
Well, good. Yeah, the 13-year-old version sit on your face all night for $7.
And I would have done it, if I had to, but I think it was much better to have a real actor doing it. So we ended up going with James Woods and Jim Belushi.
Jimmy and I really had our doubts about Oliver because we both knew Oliver's first movie was The Hand. And anytime Oliver would give us directions, Jimmy and I would, every once in a while, would go, you want me to maybe put a hand in this shot?
Well, first of all, I have to put this entire experience in the context of the time. Oliver Stone was known for having written Midnight Express and won the Academy Award. And at that point, he'd written Scarface and I think the Year of the Dragon and so on. But Oliver was kind of known around the business as this guy who was very talented, but really probably wasn't living up to his promise. And, by his own admission, a bit of a wild man. As he said, there was a period when we were doing Nixon when he said, I kind of don't remember that period. I was kind of on drugs then or something, and he says it tongue-in-cheek. But, he has, throughout his life, been a very colorful character. So he was doing this picture, and my agent sent me the script and said, Oliver Stone has written the script. I said, oh, great, he's a great writer, and he's directing it. I said, oh, that sounds intriguing. So I read it. And the original screenplay, I thought, well, they can't shoot this. There were just so many bizarre scenes in it.
When I received a communication from Oliver Stone asking if he could use my real name in the movie Salvador, I asked him. I was an admirer of Oliver Stone. My wife and I like films. On the other hand, I was somewhat concerned about Richard Boyle, whom I had met and who I regarded as something of a loose cannon. When I looked at the script, Oliver Stone very kindly sent me the script, and I read it, and they were the early script that I saw had so much terrible language, had so much drugs and sort of. It seemed to me, I suppose I was inexperienced, it seemed to me that what was dominating this film was Richard Boyle's craziness and the way he reacted to the craziness of El Salvador. And I really didn't think that it was appropriate for a former U.S. ambassador to be kind of in that.
I mean, we're morally corrupt. It's God's way of saying to us that we really are corrupt.
I was that time staying in Oliver's Brentwood house, neighbors of O.J. and O.J. Simpson, and at that time I was cavorting with the nanny in the swimming pool. I was pretending I was the creature from Black Lagoon, and she was who's the girl? The girl being chased by the creature. Anyway, I jumped into the pool and I banged my head against the side of the pool, and blood started gushing down. And guess who rings the doorbell but James Woods? Well, I think Oliver told Woods that I was a madman, and so I opened the door. I'm in a bathing suit, blood coming down my face, and Woods just, I mean, he didn't compute to him. He seemed very terrified, and he didn't stay. He stayed a very short time and left. That was my first meeting, and it went downhill from that.
First of all, Oliver said to me, you got to go down to Salvador with Boyle. Go down to El Salvador and hang out with Boyle. I said, Oliver, they're taking nail guns and putting them in people's foreheads and pulling the trigger down there, okay? I said, A. And B, Boyle, with all due respect, is kind of an asshole. I don't think I'd feel comfortable down in El Salvador with him. You know what I mean? Or you.
At the end of the day, it's true that Richard's right in saying that Jimmy would never come down. We kept asking him to come with us to Salvador, And even Mexico, he never went to either one. He hated those ideas of those countries because they were germ-full, and he was germ-free as much as possible, like young Howard Hughes. But he liked everything clean, very clean. So this was a nightmare for him, to go to bugs and scorpions and dirt and a low-budget film. He was certainly the biggest actor and star. He was a star. I was an unknown, relatively, and he was a star.
I had to deal with the rebels, that they knew that we were conning the government, all right, and not to mess with this. That this would be the end. I told them that this would be a good film for you. You'd be the good guys. So I'm telling the rebels that they're the good guys, and telling the army that they're who could be the good guys in the film. But there was this offshoot, this urban rebel group who didn't care about Hollywood. They said, if we want to shoot Cienfuegos in the head, we'll shoot him in the head anytime we feel like it. This is a war, not Hollywood. And they did. They shot him and blew his brains out on the tennis court. Well, Oliver went ballistic. So, my God, they shot our advisor and they blew his brains out in the mixed doubles in the tennis court. I said, well, yeah, Oliver, it is a war, And then he starts talking about, do they know about the phony script on the telephone? I said, Oliver, I don't think this line is secure, Hello?
As serendipity would have it for my case, our technical advisor down there got murdered by by the guerrillas, as it turned out. And they left him sitting on a tennis court with a flag over his head, a guerrilla flag over his head. And I said, Oliver, this is kind of the thing I'm talking about. I don't want to be left on a tennis court with a flag over my head and a 10-penny nail drilled through my forehead. So I think I'm not going to go to El Salvador. Thanks, though, for the offer.
The film started, and it just got worse between those two, because Woods was going to say, he's telling jokes again, Oliver. He's telling jokes. I mean, do you want this movie to be Saturday Night Live skit, or what?
Oliver would pull me to the side and whisper to me, Jimmy Wood has been playing supporting roles for a long time. He knows that camera like a hawk. Watch him. And he'd go to Jimmy, this kid is going to blow you off the screen. I think he's better than his brother.
It's a better action to keep somebody who's certain about his behavior off balance a bit, because then he'd become uncertain of his behavior. And that basis will be the crack that lets the light in.
I think Oliver's great among his many extraordinary talents is that he has a way of putting the unthinkable in juxtaposition or opposition to the unimaginable. So the unthinkable is, of course, all the issues that were happening in El Salvador during the time period of the film. And the unimaginable is these two clowns in this morass of hatred and violence and political intrigue.
I invited the entire company out in Acapulco, acting company, to have dinner 2 nights before the shoot. Acapulco Joe, which is a horror show. You walk in, it's like Circus in Vegas.
You know, every movie starts with one of these dinners with the whole cast. Everybody gets together and we're all going to be friends and all this stuff. And this dinner was just like the cast dinner from hell. I mean, it was just, you know, Savage and I looking at each other like, oh my God.
You know, Woods is looking over. He's getting sick of Boyle, who's, you know, looking like a drunk at the table. His eyes are glazed and he's like mooning over Elpidia trying to f*** her, right? Which he doesn't have a chance in hell of doing. So meanwhile, and Belushi and Rock is insulting Belushi. He has no idea how to talk to an actor. Belushi is furious. He storms out. He leaves. That ends that part of the dinner. And the rest is Woods hating Boyle and Boyle not realizing it. You know, it's that kind of dinner. It's a disaster.
Part of the mix was that this was a violent, kinetic, confusing, disturbing, egotistical, narcissistic, strange, dark, dangerous place, story, environment, and group of people. So we had to push ourselves over the edge of the envelope to get there.
It always seemed to be a mistake, even then, to have cut the orgy scene so tight because it seemed like a false beat. You know, meeting Figueroa, but not really following through with it enough. The scene was hilarious if you let it play, I thought, with the ears and the martini, the vomiting, the blowjobs. Woods was the most uncomfortable in that scene. If you look closely, he's not really getting into it like Jim and Figueroa, Jorge Luca.
The Boyle I wanted to create was a guy who goes, hey, I'm going to go along with this. And in another circumstance, probably that character, as we sort of depicted him, would. But there's a chance here to get my first in. We just watched somebody get killed. There's something going on down here, and I want to know what the scoop is because that's what my job is. I'm a journalist, and, you know, when all is said and done, I kind of want to seek the truth a little bit. So it wasn't I was holding back because I was squeamish about what the scene was about. I mean, God knows there was enough stuff to be squeamish about in that movie that we all kind of jumped into feet first.
Look, it was guerrilla filmmaking. It was a $2 million budget. We had no trailers. We didn't use makeup. I didn't use makeup. The wardrobe we had was, you know, we had a $150 budget, basically. I used some of my clothes.
The set doctor played the doctor in the movie. And he gave out pills like there was no tomorrow. And so Dr. Rock was in heaven. You know, as many Valiums, Vicodins, Perks, Ups, Darvons, whatever, you know, fistful.
The Mexican censor was on the set driving everybody nuts. She pissed off that she said, you're making Mexico look like a shithole. You know, you have stuff all over the place. It's horrible. I said, this is not Mexico, it's Salvador. That's what I saw in Salvador. A lot of dirt in the streets right now. And she said, well, you know, that's a lousy image for Latin America. She's becoming a real censor now. You know, I said, well, it's the truth, you know, and you should deal with the truth, you know, and you shouldn't be politically correct. So we argued, and I had to remove about 50% of the garbage, right? Which was pissing me off because it was a waste of time for us, and everything was going wrong now.
This was not an easy shoot, trust me, okay? This was not an easy shoot.
The Reagan administration came in, and they simply didn't understand. Or didn't want to understand is more like it. Now, it's my belief that they looked upon El Salvador as something they could put their stamp on and demonstrate the difference between the sort of do-goody, indecisive Carter administration and the tough, no-nonsense Reagan administration that would know how to deal with communist revolutionaries. Unfortunately, they simply didn't understand. The Salvadoran military do not kill armed people. They kill unarmed people. They have no experience whatsoever in fighting and no stomach for fighting either. A former CIA station chief who had left the agency came to El Salvador and spoke with a lot of military officers and the people who owned the country, and the message, as reported to me later, was, look, we're in, human rights is no longer an issue, we're going to roll these revolutionaries up, and just trust us to do the right thing. So in effect, you had these unofficial, clandestine representatives of the United States undercutting the authority of the United States ambassadors at a crucial period.
You get the truth out, things do happen, good things, hopefully. And I think that was my main motivation. It was never to make money. If I wanted to make money, I would have stayed working for the network and be controlled by them and write and do the crap that they want, do the stand-ups from the roof. Some of the reporters went down there, like we made fun of Pauline Axelrod, who could be any number of journalists who go down there. They never leave the hotel. They do the stand-ups on the roof. And the closest they ever get to combat is ordering a lobster sandwich.
One journalist actually went out and got the story and reported the story. Went, for example, to El Mozote, where a huge massacre took place of 800 people, innocent civilians, mostly women and children. And the United States government simply lied about it. Now, what happened? He was taken off from El Salvador and put on the New York City beat and then left the newspaper.
We're shooting at El Plano now. They put all these extras on this kind of lava rock hill. It was like crumbled up rock and dust and stuff, very uncomfortable. And they're naked. And their arms, some of them are limbless. And Savage and I are walking around, and as we're walking, the stuff is crumbling. Now, these people have been lying there since like 3:30 in the morning because they had to dress them all. Now it's like noon, we're finally shooting. In Mexico, in whenever it was, like September. I mean, it's like 120 degrees out. And you see all these these people are getting paid like 5 pesos a day, and they're lying out there. They've been lying out there for 12 hours, and all you hear from the hillside is this chorus of people going, agua. It was just beyond filmmaking. He said, I know, but they're up there, and if we take them down, it'll be even worse, and so on. So I said, right, okay, let's just shoot it as quickly as we can. So we're trying to get up there and shoot, and they're going by trying to give little paper cups of water to these people lying naked with their arms cut off. And now all the black smoke, and they get on the bullhorns, and they go, in Spanish, during the take, when the director says acción or whatever the hell it is, action, don't move until you hear the word cut. No matter what happens. And there's this woman lying on the side of the hill, sort of feet down, and her arms splayed back. So she's like Christ, naked, and she happened to have no legs. It was horrifying, lying like this. And we're walking above her. You're going to think I'm making this up. I'm not. And Savage and I are doing this very powerful scene about, the inhumanity of this, and it's horrifying, and death. And we kind of got to get it in one take because the way it's it's going to rain or something. It's just horrible. As I step back, a rock about this flat tumbles head over heel down the hillside, and it lands on the woman like Christ down there, literally, bam, flat on her head like this. And she doesn't flinch, but in the middle of the take, and I don't know if you can actually hear it, you just hear this, caramba. It's just so horrifying.
A picture can be very powerful. And I think that's what kind of led me to become a photojournalist. If you get that one picture that will sum something up, tell the viewer what's going on, make the world aware.
Richard is a guy who's seen combat, he has, because you feel it, and he'd go back out. You see, he's willing to sacrifice his life. He's got the luck of the Irish, he'll dance between the raindrops, But Jimmy's the opposite, because he's instinctively bourgeois. Jimmy's a great collector of wood and materialism. He loves a nice house. He wants the feeling of security in his life, because he's probably had some insecurities. And Jimmy hated Boyle after a while, because Richard was the opposite of him.
The scene that was probably tipped me into getting the Best Actor nomination for an Oscar in Salvador was the confession scene. We were breaking for lunch, and Oliver said, hey, you want to do a confession? And we were mad at each other. They were over something as usual. And I said, yeah, you mean as a character? Because it was like, He said, yeah. I said, Oliver, you go to confession on Saturday. The thing's on Sunday. He said, yeah. I want you to look in that dark, ratty little soul of yours and come up with something. I said, you mean as a character, right? He said, yeah. So we were like sparring back and forth. I said, okay, fine. In those scenes was literally on the spot improvisation. I mean, it wasn't written, and I just sort of did it.
Some people, particularly in the United States military, considered Roberto D'Aubuisson as sort of our last best hope for security. And that is a truly frightening thing. There is no question in my mind, and no question in the mind of anybody in El Salvador, that he was the man responsible for the killing of Archbishop Romero. Gene Donovan was a lay volunteer with the Mary Noble Order. Two of the nuns who were killed were Mary Noble nuns, and another one was an Ursuline nun. And they had a project in La Libertad helping the women and children. And so to the Salvadoran military, these women and children represented the enemy, because to the Salvadoran military, the church was the enemy.
We were shooting a battle scene in the streets of Santa Ana where the plane comes down, and the helicopter follows and shoots Jimmy, if you remember, after John Savage, the tracheotomy.
Oh, Jesus, God. Oh, God, John. Why do you want to put your...
Woods is nuts from dawn on because he is very nervous about machinery and real death and danger. He really is. He's freaking out about the helicopter and the plane. And who's the pilot? Are they certified? Is there insurance? Are these people ever flown in a helicopter before?
Action!
We get into this brouhaha about the plane come down one time. I mean, so low, and I see the guy rocking, and I realize nobody's told him about these telephone wires, which are in front of us. And he's got his landing gear down for some reason. I don't know what the hell he had his landing gear down for, if I remember correctly. Or maybe it was a fixed landing gear, I don't know. And this guy's coming at us, and I'm thinking, if he hits those telephone wires, And it was like, man, I just lost it. That's it. So I leave. And it's not something I ordinarily do, but it did happen this time, I have to admit. So I storm off the set. And we're in Tlayacapan, Mexico, okay? Which is near Tepoztlan, or vice versa. I don't know. The point being is that you don't know where they are. I don't know where they are. Nobody knows where they are. They're these little tiny towns. And when you're in Mexico, when you're not in at the Twin Dolphins in Baja, Mexico is in many ways, with all due respect, a third world country.
Jimmy went nuts. He went nuts. And he came out, he threw his camera bag at my feet, and he says, I've had enough of this shit. And he walks away. And I said, right away to Ramon, I said, get on the radios, catch him, bring him back, something like that. So within 10 minutes, I said, close the roads or something. Within 5-10 minutes, the guy had walked so fast that he was located 3 miles away. Ramon, go after him. Ramon jumps in the car with two other guys. They go roaring down the highway. And he's been spotted by a driver or something, followed by a driver. So before you know it, they're out on the road telling, Ramon is walking alongside Jimmy, who's looking for a bus, anything to get him out of here, take him back to the States. And Ramon's walking alongside the guy who's playing Major Max's assistant in the movie. Jimmy, please, you got to come back. We need you. Just 5 more days.
And Ramon is falling after me going, Jimmy, you got to come back. This is your Oscar for this picture. I said, Oscar, who's going to see a picture about El Salvador? A, B, I'm going to get killed here. I don't want, shut up. And I'm walking down the road, and there's no cars coming. I'm thinking, where are all the cars? Well, I don't realize they've set up a roadblock up ahead.
But meanwhile, he doesn't realize that the 2 other Mexicans of Ramon, who are in the production staff, have been ordered, and they're saying, hey, to everybody who'd listen, don't pick up this guy. He's like a crazy gringo with a .45 trying to hitch a ride.
Woods got it through his head that I was going to chop off his head with the pilot. I was going to chop off his head with the rotor blades. And that was one of the things that caused him to freak out and quit the movie. And Oliver and I were really scared, because what if he did quit? Because we're halfway through the movie. What do we do?
So it was a struggle between loving your actor and sometimes hating him. I always try to love the actor because it's the best way to work. But, if the hate gets there too, you got to deal with it. So there are times I honestly wanted to kill him. I mean, kill him. Really kill him. I never felt the urge to violence as I did in that movie since Vietnam. I just was exhausted, depressed. I had colds, I had fevers. My child had come down and he got sick. My wife was going nuts. I mean, there was a lot of hard days and nights. desolation had stuck, I mean, a night when you want to take the pistol to your head, But then there would be moments where in the afternoon when things were mostly done, there was a moment when sometimes everything felt right. The film was right, I was right. Someone asked me if I was ready to go with the next shot, if I was ready to go with the next shot, and I just remember answering, I've been ready my whole life.
The important thing about that film was it portraying the United States backing a killing machine, and I think that most Americans still have the knowledge that this is a country itself that was born in revolution, and that probably it's a pretty good idea to stay out of other people's troubles. And this is something we really must absorb, because people do not take up arms lightly. The most conservative people in the world, in my experience, are Latin American campesinos, because they know that any change will probably work to their disadvantage. They only become revolutionaries or supporters of revolution when conditions become absolutely intolerable. Haig had my report saying that these women were raped, violated, beaten, and shot at close range, executed gangland style was the phrase I used in the telegram. So this was another straightforward signal to the Salvadoran military that high officials in the Reagan administration would find excuses for any conduct, even the killing of American citizens.
One of the biggest arguments we had was about the end of the film. John Savage's character is killed, Romero's killed, the 4 church women are destroyed, and even John Cassidy's film was going to be destroyed by the thugs at the Guatemala Salvador border. And I actually went to the prop man and said, could you do me a favor and take my boot and hollow out the heel and make it a trick heel, and I'm going to put a roll of film in there. And we were filming the scene at the Guatemala border, and we had 1 take left because the sun was going down. We had like 4 minutes. And Oliver said, Jimmy, whatever you do, don't screw up this take, because this is the only take we got. And we were leaving that day. It was the end of the shoot in Mexico. Hemdale had pulled the plug on money. Half the people didn't have tickets home. And the camera was panning around. And just as it got to me, I said, hey, and by the way, I took off my boot and I go, see this? I saved the film. How about that? And they didn't speak, and I was like making fun of them, like saying, your grandmother has anal herpes and all that stuff. I was ad-libbing. And Oliver came to me and said, I can't believe you did that. You had the film in the heel of your boot. He said, that's like a Hollywood ending. You get the film through and so on. I said, look, Oliver, I know you got your gripes with Hollywood. I said, but, the guy's not a complete rat. I mean, there's something, he's going to do something. He has to make some kind of transition. We'd argue about things like that. But to Oliver's credit, he kept it in.
But actually, it was the last scene we shot in Mexico. That was a horrible day again. 42nd day, we got the plug pulled on that day. That was it, the collapse after 5-6 strikes and major economic blowouts every night, problems all the time. That was it. We had to get out of the country fast. The last thing that was done, the most crucial thing that mattered was not us, it was the negative. And Gerald and John worked very hard and had to pay some money. They got the negative out of the Churubusco Studios lab and shipped it up to Hollywood. That was the key moment. Once that negative got out, that loosened up some more money, typically. So getting the money to get it out was the issue. They had to pay the lab. So I think a lot of money went to the lab suddenly, and they didn't have money for anybody else. So then we got bumped. Literally, we had to get out of the country ahead of the law, you understand? I mean, get out, like move.
And the film did shut down. When we went back and shot, in fact, the opening of the movie was shot at the end, up in San Francisco and outside of Vegas. The guy would come from Hemdale every day with a Halliburton case, the silver case, and open it up and pass out like $100 bills to everybody. We got paid in cash. Don't tell the Screen Actors Guild, but it was better than not getting paid at all.
Then our production manager took the film, the last day's negative, and held it on as ransom for his payment.
This may not on the surface have seemed like the happiest experience, but I got to tell you, I really say this from my heart. This was probably the greatest experience I ever went through, and I think you're going to be someday one of our greatest directors. And it was an honor to work with you, and it would be an honor to have you as my friend.
I think that film did more to tell people really what's going on, even though it was a feature film, than all the rest of the stuff put out for years and years and years and years. And people told me that in Congress.
And I just went to the movie theater to see it, and I came out, and this lady came running up to me, kind of squat, short woman, and she got up to me, and this honest to God happened, came up with tears in her eyes and got on her knees and kissed my hand. And she was a Salvador survivor. Her whole family had been killed. And she just said in Spanish, and I said to somebody, what is she saying? And she said, thank you for telling the story of my family. You know, they now still live.
We opened and died, you know, so it was a really, it never was a good experience in that regard. It wasn't a good experience because making the film was difficult, editing it was impossibly difficult, and then releasing it was a disaster.
It was released by this little company that they put together, played for a couple of weeks, and that was it. And then, you know, a year later, we got Academy Award nominations, and it was like, how could this possibly happen? Who saw this film? But the people who saw it never had an experience like it, never have since.
There's so much stuff that broke ground. The way it had never been treated in movies like that, about sex and about dialogue, and it was a raw and, as you say, gonzo quality. I was thinking that, you know, Hunter Thompson was certainly a model for one of these characters, you know, his characters. What they call gonzo journalism. You know, the journalists are out of control and nuts and living subjectively through the story.
You know, the Boyle character really leads Dr. Rock to his place among men, you know, his place within the world. And when you find your place, you sacrifice yourself more. You have more compassion.